Alright, this is one of those Bible moments that make you pause and say, wait, what? In Ezekiel 4, God tells the prophet Ezekiel to cook his food over human dung. Yeah, you heard me right. Human waste. And you shall eat it as a barley cake, having baked it in their sight over human dung. So, why would God tell him to do something so gross? Was this just an extreme object lesson? Or is there something deeper going on here? Let's break it down. Ezekiel was a prophet during one of the darkest times in Israel's history, the Babylonian exile. The Israelites had repeatedly turned away from God, worshipped idols, and ignored his warnings, so God allowed the Babylonians to conquer them as punishment. Ezekiel's job? Be the messenger of bad news. And instead of telling people what would happen, God made Ezekiel live out the prophetic signs, symbolic actions that represented Israel's judgment. God gives Ezekiel some very specific instructions. Now, as for you, take wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt, and put them in one vessel, and make them into bread for yourself. Your food which you eat shall be 20 shekels a day by weight, and you shall eat it from time to time. Basically, Ezekiel is told to eat rationed food for 390 days, symbolizing the coming famine when Jerusalem would be under siege. And then here comes the kicker. And the bread that you eat shall be like barley cakes, and you shall bake it over human dung in their sight. Why dung? Because it symbolized defilement. The Israelites had defiled themselves through sin, and now their food, something meant to sustain life, would be defiled too. Ezekiel protests because, cooking human dung, and God gives him a concession. Then I said, Lord God, behold, I have never been defiled, for from my youth until now I have not eaten anything that died of itself or was torn by animals, nor has any unclean meat entered my mouth. Then he said to me, see, I will give you cow's dung instead of human dung, so that you may prepare your bread over it. So instead of human waste, Ezekiel gets to use cow dung, which was actually a common cooking fuel in ancient times. Not great, but at least it wasn't human. The whole thing was a warning sign for Israel. Famine and judgment were coming. The rationed food that symbolized the siege of Jerusalem, where food would be scarce. The dung, it showed that their suffering would be humiliating and degrading. It was also a symbol of spiritual defilement. The Israelites had defiled themselves by worshiping idols and disobeying God. So now, even their food, a basic necessity for life, would be defiled. And the third part, God's mercy, even in judgment. Ezekiel pleads with God and allows him to use cow dung instead of human dung. Even in judgment, God still shows mercy, a reminder that he listens. At first, this might seem like an ancient history lesson, but there are some powerful takeaways for us today. Sin always has consequences. Israel ignored God's warnings for years, thinking they could do whatever they wanted, but eventually their choices caught up with them. The same is true today. When we ignore God's guidance, we can't expect no consequences. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever a person sows, this he will also reap. Sometimes God calls us to do hard things. Ezekiel was asked to do something really uncomfortable, and yet he obeyed. In our lives, God may call us to stand for truth in a world that rejects it. Let go of things that are defiling us, sin, bad habits, toxic relationships. Consider all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Even in judgment, God shows us mercy. Even when Israel was at their worst, God still listened to Ezekiel's plea and adjusted the command. This reminds us that God is not a tyrant. He is just, but he is also merciful. If we turn back to him, he always offers grace. The Lord's act of mercy indeed do not end, for his compassion do not fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Ezekiel cooking over dung isn't just some random, weird Bible moment. It's a warning and a lesson. Sin defiles us. Sometimes obedience is uncomfortable, and God is just, but he's also merciful. So, next time you read a strange passage in the Bible, remember, there's always a deeper meaning, and sometimes the weirdest details hold the biggest lessons. Thanks for listening, and if you're enjoying biblical breakdowns, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment any recommendations you have for future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.